Hey everyone, happy Filipino American History Month. Welcome back to our show. This is Nani, your co-host of the Filipino American Women Project podcast show. Before we get started today, we have another Pinay visionary to shout out for you guys who was shared to us by @BlackBeltSoprano on Instagram. Jen, do you want to talk about our feature today?
Yes, I do. And I also have the honor of possibly butchering this person's name. So,
Yay.
so shout out to Black Belt Soprano for sharing with us Jen Vilosis, I think is how you pronounce it. And if you want to help us not butcher the name, I will have her information in the show notes. So you can always call in and let us know if I pronounce it wrong. Or if Jen is listening to this, you can correct me. I'm totally fine with that. So the cool thing about Jen Vilosis is that she is the first Filipino American transgender woman to open a bakery in Chicago. And so if you are in Chicago, her bakery is called Genevieve's Bakery. And I am just in awe of that. I think it's one thing to be a business owner. I think it takes a lot of guts to open up a business. But I also think it takes a unique set of guts, to come out as a transgender woman. And so shout out to you, Jen Vilosis, for, one, being so open about your sexual orientation and your choice of who you want to identify as, and also for having a bakery, Genevieve's Bakery. So if you want to learn more about her bakery, just check it out in the show notes, or you could also check her out online on Instagram. Her Instagram account is Genevieve's Bakery, and the name is Genevieve's Bakery Chicago. And it is proudly trans, LGBT owned, and she has a lot of followers. She has almost 4,000 followers on Instagram. So check her out and see the delicious cakes and cupcakes and what have you, and all the delicious sweets that you can think of at a bakery. Check it out on her website or on her Instagram account, and just say hi to her and wish her a happy Filipino American History Month, and let her know that we consider her a Pinay visionary. So thank you, IG handle Black Belt Soprano, for nominating her as a Pinay visionary for our show today. With that said, let's go ahead and get started with the show. Welcome to the Filipino American Women Project, a podcast show that shares stories and life lessons told by individuals living or have lived in America that are of Filipino descent and identify as female. I'm your host, Jen Amos, a fellow Filipino American woman, and I'm excited for you to join us. Let's get started. All right. Hi, everyone. Jen Amos here with the Filipino American Women Project podcast show. And as always, I have my wonderful co-host with me, Nani Dominguez. Nani, welcome back to the show.
Hello. Welcome back, everyone.
Yes, and we are excited. We have another special episode for the Filipino American History Month. We have with us today Pinay activist and scholar Stacey Ann. So Stacey Ann is currently a PhD student working on feminist scholarship, focusing on the lives of Filipino women in the USA during the Great Depression. Crazy. I would have never even considered that at all, because I don't really study history. But anyway, that's just me. With that said, Stacey, welcome to the show.
Hi.
Hey, very cool. We're super happy to have you. I want to give our listeners a little background on Stacey. We had communicated over 2 years ago. And Stacey, why don't you share a little bit about how you heard about the project and why you initially reached out?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. So the first time I was introduced to TFAW, I was actually just trying to find internships for I think it was my second year of graduate school at UC Davis. And I really wanted to engage with grassroots and community organizations that really focused on what does it mean to be Filipino American. And I happened to find through a Facebook search, Jen, your organization. And I thought, well, I have to be a part of this in any way, whatever it is. And so that's how I met you and TFAW.
Yes. The cool thing is that one of your pieces or one of your assignments for one of your classes at the time, the Feminist Theory American Studies class, I believe, you had decided to write a piece about us, which I really appreciated, by the way. I want to thank you for that.
Oh yeah, no worries. It was an honor to do it because no one really talks about Filipina feminism and how we express our work for the community and for ourselves and how we create communities and circles for healing, specifically for the experiences of women of color. And so I just thought it was something I can help contribute to.
Yeah, there was a line in there that I want to read. I actually want to read your entire essay, but we don't have time for that, or maybe we will. Who knows? But there was a line in there that stood out to me as I was kind of reading through it again. And it says, Filipino Americans, despite the census data confirming their labor, such as nurses, students, farmhands, domestic workers, wives and mothers, and their presence during the 1920s and their contributions to both their Filipino ethnic enclaves and the broader Asian American community, especially are without a history for current generations of Filipino Americans to fall back on or reference. And so my takeaway from that is that kind of just what you said, there's really not a lot of historical documentation of us. And so I think it's super awesome right now as a PhD student, you are focusing on the lives of Filipino women in the USA during the Great Depression.
I mean, I stumbled on that when I was getting my master's at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. I noticed at one of the archives I was interning at that there was a file called Filipinos on the Central Coast, but the file actually had a jumble of Chinese Americans, Filipino Americans, Japanese Americans, and someone had just lumped all of these Asian groups together. And there was one photograph, because I had to help organize it, there was one photograph of a Filipino woman standing outside a Filipino market in 1932. And I thought, that's interesting because for every 20 Filipino farmhands, there's maybe only one or no Filipinas. And I thought, well, what is she doing there? And how can I relate to this photograph? Because it's basically a Filipino woman with her back turned to the camera. And I did more digging, and that's how I fell in love and passionate with this idea of trying to restore the Filipina presence in America. And so that was basically where my interest and creative interest went to. Going into my PhD program too, I wanted to collect basically a story that can help us begin how we understand what it means to be Filipina and Filipino American, was basically through that photograph.
Wow. You're going to have to share that photo with us.
Wow, I'd love to see that.
Yeah, it's just a woman with her back turned and she's just facing the market.
I think it's so fascinating that you're pursuing this. I feel like you're the first person I know that is trying to bring light to Filipina history in America. Because another thing you had in your essay that you wrote for us, it said much of the historical literature on Filipino and Filipino Americans flourished during the 1990s, but much of it was only for the Filipino male experience. So I just want to commend you for what you're doing. I can't say that enough. And yeah, that's it. I really can't say enough other than that.
Thank you so much. Because the field of academia is just so, unfortunately, there's moments where it's very conservative and they ask you the question as you're doing your rigorous training, like, well, why Filipino American women? What is so unique and special? Because they want you to create this they say sexy, which is, I think is very gendered, but this new sexy argument when it comes to Asian American history, just American history in general. And that always struck a chord with me, even to this day. Be asked, why study yourself? And I've had that moment in academic circles. And so I think those kind of jabs, especially in the racially charged and gendered moment we're living in now, it really pushes me to write this history of Filipinas in America and Filipino Americans and their daughters from 1900 to 1965. Because when we think of Asian American and Asian immigrants in the US, it's very difficult for mainstream America to conceptualize that there were Asian families prior to the brain drain in 1965 Immigration Act.
Whoa. Can you talk a little bit about the brain drain act? I've never heard of that.
Oh, no. I mean, they lumped that in with the 1965 Immigration Act. So LBJ, they President LBJ decided in the 60s, well, he said that it's unconstitutional for LBJ in Congress, it's unconstitutional to have quota restrictions on immigration, especially when it comes to these quotas which have been influenced by racial biases. Like if we look at the history of immigration policy, it was meant to restrict Asian immigration, especially because they thought that they were bringing in unskilled laborers and they were going to suck the American economy dry and take American jobs and things like that. And so race, the conceptualization of race had a lot to do with these immigration quotas. But in 1965, they argued that no, it's unconstitutional because of its racist implications. But at the same time, it's the Cold War. So the US, if they're going to allow immigrants to come in, they want a specific type of immigrant. These people were usually, not only they had family members in the US, so it's family reunification, but they want an immigrant who can provide skilled, specific labor. Because the US, under this mask of democracy, they're thinking, oh, well, we need skilled laborers because it's too expensive to actually grow our own, put them to school. It's cheaper to actually extract and import them to the US. And so this is where we see another influx of Filipino engineers, doctors, nurses. A lot of the nurses come in through programs and the Immigration Act of 1965. So when we think of Filipino Americans, usually it's the first generation of nurses, doctors, engineers, and teachers after 1965, when actually there are Filipinos and Filipino Americans who have been creating communities prior to that, as early as like 1908 with the pensionados who came over to do schooling in the US.
Wow. I'm curious with your work right now in your PhD program, how challenging is it or easy? I don't know. Like, what is it like having kind of like creating this history for Filipino women today?
I mean, it is crazy, hectic, but also fulfilling. The crazy part is where, you are met with challenges as to why this research is important. That's one thing. The second part of why it's crazy is because the resources are so lacking. Most of the resources I found, they're by chance. I happen to be at an exhibit that I'm hosting or presenting. I happen to bump into Filipino Americans whose families have been here since the 30s. So I find oral histories that way, like blessings in disguise when I do these exhibits or presentations. But I think the other part that's fulfilling besides recording these women's narratives is that when I actually get the chance to teach at the Asian American Studies Department, as a TA or as a part-time or a lecturer, it's when you see the faces in the audience of undergraduates who are ages 18 to 21, and this is their first time recognizing or hearing that there are communities that look like them and face the same, turmoil, struggles as they do as part of immigrant families. So I think that's probably the best part of doing all this research that makes it the most fulfilling.
One thing I feel like we've been doing on this show is a big scavenger hunt of trying to collect these stories from people. And it sounds like you're, in a way, doing the same thing. And like you mentioned, you've been able to find blessings in disguise, just kind of being out and about and in the work that you're doing. So I think that's really awesome. I want to go ahead and turn it over to Nani now and see if Nani, if you had any questions or comments.
Yeah, I do. My questions are pretty vague, so I'll let you kind of run with it in whatever direction you see necessary, Stacey. But I wanted to have you help us kind of just focus on Filipino American history, specifically from the woman's standpoint. So our last special episode for Filipino American History Month, we talked a little bit about people like Carlos Bulasan, Jose Rizal, and different kind of male figures in history, but we kind of want to get a better idea of, while they were busy writing their novels and leading revolutions and things, what have the women been doing? What have the women been up to? And kind of how our role in society has shifted and expanded since we've been forced into these molds by colonization and then by various like survival tactics in having to migrate to various different places, and how those historical events have forced the masses of our diaspora into primarily caregiving roles. And then like how you talk about with then needing skilled labor requirements, then having an influx of of like engineers and nurses and things. So, and also in pre-colonial times, like you've mentioned before, there's quite a lack of literature, but from what I have found, it seems like women were really known to be healers and shamans in pre-colonial times, and how that has kind of played a part in paving our path.
Right. Yeah, no, I know it's a lot of information. It's a long history of Filipinas and their impact on family formation and how that translated through the colonial period and immigration and the larger Filipina diaspora that has its roots everywhere today. But I mean, if we want to talk about Filipinas prior to the colonial period, you're right. Some of the primary resources are from travelers, and one of them is, I think if you've ever heard of her, it's Urduja. So she's from the Philippine archipelago, and she basically was a princess or queen in her own right, and she was also a military strategist. So she commanded armies, and she basically would tell men who wanted to marry her in order to lay claim to her kingdom that the only way she would ever marry them or partner with them is if they could actually defeat her in a duel, because she was skilled in combat. And I to this day, I don't think she actually was tied down by any man. She was able to lead her kingdom, and I think also travel an island hop throughout Southeast Asia. Some very small sources, and you're right, they could be witch doctors or shamans, priestesses, and Filipinas could act, before the Spanish and Portuguese came, they could actually divorce amicably if they wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and maintain their family's property. Like the father could give property to his daughter, and no one would question it. But of course, when the Spanish and Portuguese come and they take Manila, that entire system gets flipped on its head, and we see women, Filipinas, having to convert to Catholicism and also adhere to what does family formation look like to Spanish Catholics and that system. And the Spaniards had a really hard time actually trying to subdue Filipinas and their families. And so they actually converted some of their traditions and rituals to match Catholic meanings. And so when we think of like the cotillion or the debut, a woman, Filipina woman's coming of age story, it has to do a lot with Filipina traditions when it comes to what does it mean to be a Filipina during the pre-colonial period and coming of age, an entire ceremony. Because that was the only way that the Spanish could, in a way, successfully convert Filipinas to be part of the colonial system. But I mean, if we go beyond that, of course, there's Filipinas who are also fighting for independence and sovereignty. Like we have the famous Guerrilleras. She was basically saying that this part of northern Luzon for Ilocanos, this should be for the Philippine people. And so she actually led guerrilla groups with her husband. And even after her husband was assassinated by those who were loyal to the Spanish Empire, she still continued to fight. And even though when she was driven into the mountains, and they eventually captured her, but they were the Spanish who were there in the Philippines and the Filipinos who were loyal to the Spanish Empire. They were so afraid of her because they thought she's so powerful and influential, both as a military strategist and a revolutionary, that she could actually turn the Spanish system in on its head and rally more people to the cause. So they were so afraid of her, they had to capture her and then execute her. So we have these moments of Filipinas, being resilient and contributing to their community, but where is it, right? And the other thing I noticed, the other thing I noticed in my research is those who write history, they pick and choose who they want because they fit this perfect narrative of what a Filipina should be. And it's informed by all these silly colonial ideologies as to what gender and femininity is and what's a good Catholic woman in the body of a Filipina. So again, there's so many other histories and individuals we're missing because of all these different types of tropes Filipinas have been shoved into. But even if we look at the Philippine Revolution, after Jose Rizal is executed, we look at Bonifacio and all these generals who are coming together to, rally this cry for true Philippine sovereignty. The women who participated in that, it was very class conscious, but they were usually the wives, aunts, or daughters of these male Philippine revolutionaries. But basically, Bonifacio's wife, she starts a club, and she's the one who actually maintains this community and this paper trail of what the Philippine Revolution is actually going to be, to the point where she also is seen as a threat to people who want to disrupt that enterprise. So she experiences a lot of violence too along the way, but her story is still kind of set aside in comparison to her husband and all the men like Aguinaldo who were part of that process. So it's those moments where they're pushed aside, and it's really sad to see that, because again, you can't have community without the other half. And what I've noticed in research for Filipino American history, we hear about the Manong generation, so the farm laborers, the migrant farm laborers who also went to work in the canneries, and they followed crops all the way through Montana and Idaho. When they came back to California, those communities that were settled, they weren't necessarily all bachelor Filipino American or little Manila towns. The reason why those towns could be settled is because even if Filipino Americans or Filipinas made a small population in comparison to the men, you have the Filipino Women's Club, you have these women's auxiliary clubs that actually collected and created programs so that community could find its roots. So this idea of home, family, despite this harsh migration patterns and the migrant labor history, they kind of owe their stability to these women who organized and helped create these communities for them to come back to. And we see it. Like if you look at the Filipino Women's Club in Salinas, which has been around since 1930. That's crazy. Again, for every 20 Filipino farmhands in America, there's like one Filipina. But there was enough of a community in Salinas of Filipino women and Filipino American women since 1930. They're celebrating their 90th anniversary next year. Just thinking about what they could do with so little in such a racially charged and violent period, it says a lot if we look at pre-colonial up until present day with Filipino Americans and clubs like this. It really demonstrates just how significant Filipino women are to community, family formation, and just this idea of what it means to be a cultural matriarch and why that's so important for generations thereafter.
Yeah. I recently just joined Gabriella, the mass organization Gabriella, which is named after one of the people that you just referenced, Gabriela Silang. And it's interesting to me because while there's a lack of resources, there's not a lot of stories that we can find, but you were able to. Gabriella is basically the only one that I've known about until just now when you were just talking. I am just wondering what your thoughts are on why someone like her is not recognized widely as a historical hero or figure, because this is all super new to me still. So as I'm learning about it, I'm going and talking to people outside of those groups about it, and I'm not getting the response that I have myself, which is confusing and also frustrating. So I'm just I'm curious to hear your thoughts on why more people don't know who Gabriela Silang was.
Well, I think it's really complex matter, right? When we think of the Philippines and Filipino culture and how it was basically outlined to fit a patriarchal mold, not only patriarchal, but a very Catholic and conservative mode. So the ideal woman under all those circumstances of oppression and that type of system, it doesn't allow for a female rebel fighter, for a female guerrilla or guerrillera, right? And so it's those moments of trying to maintain a philosophy about who counts as a hero. Those are some of the factors that are going to push out these women from being part of the greater narrative of Filipina women's history. From what I've noticed in my research. So yeah, Catholic ideals as to what a good woman is. It's a mother. You look at Gabriella, was she a mother? I mean, you could argue in our 21st century expectations of womanhood, yes, she was an activist and a fighter, and she seems like a proto-feminist. But for that time period and up until the 1960s, Gabriella looks like a revolutionary that should be kept under wraps because she's not fitting this perfect mold of Filipino womanhood.
Right. That's just so crazy to me that even when I'm talking to people that we start with the whole lack of representation thing, and it's important to share our stories, and then tell them about this historical figure that I just learned about, and the sentiment is just not there. And I'm kind of like, well, okay, we're here complaining that our story, that we're not seen, that we don't feel seen or heard, but here's someone that we can take and use as an example. There may not be a lot of those opportunities, but here's one, and why aren't we not clinging to it? But it just seems like what you just said, maybe because of for whatever reasons, people are just not able to grasp that kind of depth in her story.
I mean,
So, yeah.
the fact that she's Ilocano, so she's a brown Filipina,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately, that Spanish caste system of color, the variations of what whiteness can provide a Filipino, so how mestiza you are, that's actually going to also add as to whose story should be preserved or who has priority. In the Philippines, Gabriela Silong is one of the very few women who are highlighted in Filipina history. But again, there are many other women who should be noticed. It's just that their histories are lacking for these various social and economic and religious factors.
All right, Jen Amos here, jumping into the middle of our show, as I always do, to remind you why this show is possible. So, at the end of every episode, I tend to say, if you didn't catch our guest contact info, don't worry, we'll have those in the show notes. Check them out. I worked so hard on them. You're welcome. Well, it's been brought to my attention that our show notes are not as easy to find as I thought, which is why, starting summer 2020, the Filipino American Women Project is proud to be partnering with Captivate, the world's only growth-oriented podcast host. Captivate is created for independent podcasters, designed from day one to help you to focus on audience growth and the expansion of your audio influence. One way that Captivate makes our lives easier as independent podcasters is by taking the guesswork out of making a website for your show. That's right, a website for your show. So listeners, starting summer 2020, finding our show notes will be so much easier. All thanks to Captivate. You're welcome, as always. If you're about to start podcasting or are getting burnt out from all the extra work of producing one, like building a website, consider a 7-day free trial, that's right, free, with Captivate by visiting thefil-am-woman.com. That's the Fil-Am, short for Filipino American woman.com. Or, check out our show notes in the meantime, which is in the details section of each episode. Once again, you can visit thefil-am-woman.com or visit the details section of this episode.
Right. And part of the decolonization process, I think, for our community as a whole is kind of redefining those metrics of what we measure or how we're judging or measuring other people's success. Sorry. So let me see if I can maybe tie that into the next question that I had for you, which is another just vague, open-ended question about how have we gotten here? Like, how have we gotten to a place where we're so marginalized we can't even recognize one of our own, I guess?
Oh, yeah, that's a that's a very complex question. In terms of being or finding a place as Filipino American women and being able to profess who we are and what we do, is that what you mean?
Yes, and more specifically, how can we kind of loosen the grip that the man or whatever has historically had on us and kind of reclaim our narrative as we talk about people like Gabriella being subdued in history books or wherever people get history lessons because of their idea of what a woman should be marketed as.
Yeah.
How can we kind of take back that power and start to redefine that?
Right. Well, okay, yeah, as a scholar activist, there are avenues that we can take on. Of course, they're going to be extremely difficult, but some of the ways that I do it is I work with grassroots organizations like the Below Sun Center of Filipinx Studies at UC Davis, like the first of its kind. And my main role there is to recover Filipino American history, especially from the women's perspective. I think it is extremely crucial to uncover these histories and to teach them for broad audiences, right? That's what sometimes academia gets flack for, because they produce knowledge for the sake of knowledge. Whereas grassroots communities and organizations, when we work with academics, we can actually provide these histories and these narratives to the broader audience so that we can instill change. And I think history in that way is very important in order for us to create that stepping stone as to how we break out of these categories and ways that marginalize us and minoritize us, because it always helps to begin the healing process, understanding and seeing another face or hearing another story that's similar to ours, who went through the same type of struggles of being a Filipina or Filipino American. Just having another mirror to look at and to review can help us figure out why it is that we feel this way and find a sense of community. So I think history has that. Doing history can actually provide that first step towards trying to break these molds, because it forces us to recognize ourselves and those who came before us and create those bridges, and then extend those bridges to other communities and other brown girls who are experiencing the same type of atrocities or the same types of marginalization. So for me, that's why history is so significant. And I think that's one way we can actually get out of these systems of oppression and better understand ourselves. The other way that we can tackle sexism piled on with racism, or the class conscious, or trying to tackle the mall minority myth, all those types of things, another way we can try to get over those humps and hurdles is by reaching out to our communities, right? Getting youths actively engaged with what it means to be different, acknowledging difference, and teaching them how to empathize. And unfortunately, we don't really have the tools to do that. But right now in California, we are trying to get ethnic studies from the kindergarten through 12th grade level, like approved of, so that we can actually have these histories of color, right? Not only of color, but also creed, tribe, religion, gender, sexuality. All of that is compiled into this new ethnic studies curriculum. I think that's another aspect, right, that branches off of history and historical research, so that we can teach the next generation what it means to understand and accept what it means to be different. Like, what does difference actually look like? And how does difference add to diversity, right? Because I think if you build that, if you build those tools at such a young age, I mean, kindergarten, teaching ethnic studies at kindergarten, you had to have a college degree to even have the opportunity to sign up for an ethnic studies course. If we start that young, I think that will help the next generation and the generations thereafter to actually redefine these molds of what it means to be a woman of color, for instance. But of course, as an activist scholar, I always think of the ground up and how education is actually going to spark change, because we take it for granted sometimes, even in a public education system. I worked in public education and volunteered for a long time. It was always disheartening and sad to see kids of color grow up, minorities grow up, and they don't have access to understanding why it is that they're being treated this way, or why it is the world operates this way based on these identities that are just all social constructs. So I really think starting from the ground up, history, providing that to the public, and then also providing K through 12 ethnic studies, I mean, that is the way to go if we want to heal and challenge what it means to be a minority.
Love it.
I was just listening to everything both have been discussing. And just like what you said, Stacey, I feel like my greatest takeaway from what you said so far is that learning our history is a form of empowerment and healing. And I actually never looked at it that way. And kind of like what you said, like how now they're trying to offer ethnic studies at younger grades, like in kindergarten and stuff, which is super awesome. I didn't learn about my history till I was in college. And even then I had to actively seek out the course to sign up for. And when I was in the courses, I just felt so disconnected to the history and the facts and the figures that it just didn't resonate with me. Even knowing in my own family, for example, like how my grandpa was a veteran in World War II, and we lost his brother in the Bataan March. Like, I remember in college, even knowing all that and doing and marching for the justice for Filipino American veterans, like even then I still felt disconnected. But to hear it through you and the way that you're telling our story, it makes me want to learn our history now, like through the way that you're describing it. I also think it's kind of fascinating because I feel like the number one thing that we tend to get on the show, the number one like commonality that we all have is not feeling enough, is just kind of like not feeling enough and struggling with the imposter syndrome. And I think that has a lot to do with colonization, because all the stories that you're sharing with me of like Filipinas in the past, it's like, wow, like had I known those stories, I don't think I would have struggled the way that I did today as a Filipino American woman. And so for any of our listeners that's listening to the show and you have felt disconnected with history, with our own history, I hope that this inspired you to study Filipino women in the past before colonial times, because that's the truth. That's who we really were before all the colonization happened. And it's just very affirming to me. And it's another reason like why I like to, do this project and why I like to bring other women on, because I think we all are together figuring out the lie of not feeling good enough and struggling with the imposter syndrome. I think if we all could be like, gosh, like that is so wrong, that is such a lie, we can all just heal and be empowered together and rewrite our narratives and actually seek out this history and document it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's been a crazy whirlwind of doing all this research in the last, oh my God. So I met you 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Now I'm in my 4th year at my PhD program. But oh my God, no, Jen, I really wanted to say thank you when you connected me to the Filipino American National Historical Society of San Diego. One of the Lolas, actually, again, a blessing in disguise, right? Connecting with other people who have the same passion about this. Lola reached out to me, Miss Emma Booten, and her father was a Manong, and he came here during the 1920s to farm in Santa Rosa. He experienced racism. He's like, forget this, I'm going back to Philippines. And then they survived World War II, and then she comes over during the brain drain as a nurse. And
Wow.
she's also part of a military legacy. So again, she's part of the archives at the Bulosan Center, the first grassroots organization by graduate students, and a Filipina, Dr. Rodriguez at Asian American Studies Department in UC Davis. Like, now we can actually house her family's story. And that's such a great archive that I'm very proud of. And I would not have been able to create that without you, Jen. So I really, because you did the middle ground part. You created that bridge for me to the San Diego Fil-Am community. So it's moments like this where I really think that having a secure Filipino American circle and feeling comfortable, having a comfortable space with women like me who understand what it is that I'm doing, like I really appreciate that. So happy Filipinx American History Month, you guys. With other people, like-minded people, I really appreciate it.
It's my absolute pleasure. I'm so grateful to hear that. I mean, I'm a fairly like confident woman, but even I sometimes question like, what am I doing? Like, is this working? And it's just great to even be a bridge or a connector for some people. And so I'm just really happy to hear that. I didn't know that turned out the way that it did, and it just brings me a lot of joy.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, no, thank you so much. She was great to interview.
Oh, very cool. Awesome. I love it. So I have like a couple of other questions, not in any like particular order, but let me see here. I was taking some notes. In your research, and I'm just curious, maybe for people who want to get started in learning about Filipina history in America, or even just learning about Filipino stories in general, have you come across any books or resources by like Filipino authors that you would recommend?
I recently wrote one. It's about
you could promote it.
I'm just saying, because I work with other organizations, Pacific Atrocities Education, which is in the heart of San Francisco, Chinatown. They talk about, or they do outreach with college youth about the experiences of Asian immigrants and Asian Americans during World War II and the atrocities committed. And I actually have a book with them about the Filipina guerrillas and spies who participated in World War II and helped to liberate the Philippines. So that is one resource, and all the proceeds go back to that grassroots organization, by the way. So that book is basically about Filipinas' contribution and also tracking their immigration patterns and histories. So a lot of the women in that book as well, how did they face the caste system? If they were brown girls versus being mestiza or being mixed, how did their narrative survive, and how was it affected by sex and gender discrimination, even when they came to the US, which basically suppressed their ability to talk about their roles as veterans during World War II. So there's that resource. That's Pinay Guerrilleras. And then also all the people I work with at the Bulosan Center, they're all graduate students, and Dr. Rodriguez as well, she is the head of Asian American Studies Department, but they're also working on books, and I think they've also released some articles and books about the larger Filipinx diaspora. And so that goes from anywhere between like redefining or understanding Filipino or Filipinx gender, sexuality, human trafficking, health coalitions, and doing policy advocacy at the Capitol. So that's a good resource, like the Bulosan Center website. You guys can find that online. And then for other there's a community of Filipino American scholars, right? But again, because we're a minority, it's so hard sometimes to locate us. So that's what's so great about the Bulosan Center, if you look us up, is that we actually have conference. We had our first conference last year where we connected with all these different Filipinx and Filipino American scholars, and they came over to UC Davis and they presented their work. And I'm not kidding. They have articles as on topics like boba, on boba, right? About how boba as a center for youth, Asian American youth, intergenerational experiences, how boba was a way to connect to being Asian. No, yeah, it was amazing. I was sitting at this conference and I was like, oh my God, this is fun. This is liberating. And this is also very informative. So again, below Sun Center website, that's a good location to find resources on the Filipinx experience. And then when it comes to like actually looking at or locating resources on Filipina American history or Filipina history, that's even harder. That's even harder, which is why I'm trying to create all these archives with our archivist, Jason Sarmiento, at the Below Sun Center, just specifically dedicated to locating Filipinas in America, Filipino Americans from 1900 to present day. So I'm trying to do that so that future researchers, scholars, or even undergraduates, whomever, it's available to the public. I'm working on that right now. So we can get, so that when you click on it, you can actually see the photographs that these families donated. So there's that resource, digital archives. And then again, Filipina American history, you have some works by some Berkeley scholars. I think one of them is Empire of Care. And some of them are memoirs of Filipina Americans who were born in the 1930s in the US. But you really actually have to get grounded in Filipino American history in order to just locate them. Some of them, there's only like one copy of a woman's memoir. That has, oh my God, that has been so difficult to just locate because there's only one copy. And so right now I'm actually looking at a history of feminism in the Philippines from 1900 to 1955. And there's only so many copies of this book, and I happen to get my hands on one. And so right now I'm trying to write a summary and discussion and add that to my dissertation. But it's just wild what you find, but you really have to just put your working boots on and really just dig deep for these sources, for which again showcases that Filipino American history is almost non-existent. But yeah, again, if you want resources, the best place to do that is in archives. But who's going to go through all that ridiculous schooling?
Yeah,
and you just have access to these tools, to these histories, which is very frustrating with academia sometimes, right? Because we take for granted what college is, what education is. Like, you need these tools in order just to find a narrative that has been lost to history. And sometimes I think, well, I only have so much time in the day. But again, the Below Sun Center is really working to create these resources to find and locate Filipino American history. So I really just recommend going there as a starting place, or even just contacting the Below Sun Center, because we're networking with other Filipino American scholars across the country, and even in Hawaii and other grassroots organizations as well.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. That's really, really good to know, especially for people that are listening to this for the first time and really don't know where to begin. They can check out the Bulosan Center.
You did just remind me of a line in your essay that I also had saved that said something about how the Asian American experience is watered down by longstanding American prejudices. I'm not sure if there's anything else to really expand on there, but what you were just talking about kind of reminded me of that statement that I thought might be worth mentioning on the podcast.
Oh, yeah. Asian American history. I mean, you see Asian American literature like flourish during the 80s and 90s, and during the Asian American power movement during the 60s and 70s. But then, because of mainstream American society, how they interpret for a long time what Asian is, our histories kind of get lumped, and they create this one category of Asian. What does it mean to be Asian American? And of course, Filipinos will get lost in there. Our histories will get lost in there. That's the one thing when you find identity and you create the term Asian American, right? What are the repercussions of that? Of course, onlookers who have the privilege of being the accepted notion of what it is to be an American citizen, sometimes they look at that and they kind of gawk at it and they prescribe all their stereotypes to what Asian is. And so that also adds to this dilution of Asian American history and all its various groups that make up Asian American history. Like, here's just one example that was ridiculous. I personally thought it was crazy, but I just had the Filipino American History booth at Davis and Central Park. It was International Cultural Festival Day. And these passerbyers who are coming by, they came in and they're like, "Oh, Filipino is Asian?" Or what is the Philippines? Isn't that just a resort island?
What?
These kind of, no, I know, right? But then again, the academic in me, the grassroots in me was, upset, of course. But then the academic in me thought, like, can you expect like every regular American to perceive the Filipino in any other way when the Philippines is seen as a developing nation, right? And those mail order brides, all these stereotypes they have about the Philippines and the Filipino women, especially because I'm a Filipino woman standing there at this booth. They had all these expectations and judgments already. But hearing those kind of comments, it basically adds to the discussion as to why Filipino American history in the larger scheme of Asian American history can sometimes seem non-existent. It's those moments, social interactions, where I realized, this is even more so the reason, adding to it, why we need to keep doing this type of scholarship. It's to change the minds of those stereotypes.
Right. And even thinking about how that translates into your identity, the way that you define yourself or identify with yourself. Growing up, filling out applications, I was always confused how I was supposed to identify when it asked me what your race is. And for the first portion of my life, I was under the impression that I was supposed to identify myself as a Pacific Islander. And then someone was like, and I was maybe 15 or 16, someone was like, "No, you're Asian." So then I started putting Asian, but I still, every time I'm faced with that question, I'm like, And then it also makes me think about, if this is a difficult question for me to answer for myself, what about all the other races and ethnicities that are not listed that I don't even know about? What box do they check? And I don't know. I mean, I can spiral on that and go on and on forever, but it translates in so many ways. There's so many, like you said, repercussions of creating that category, I guess.
Yeah, no, it's so important to mark those boxes. For the sake of having census representation in our districts.
Right. And then, like, how accurate is that if we ourselves don't even know how we're supposed to be identifying on these papers?
Right. So that's two sides of the same coin of finding representation, right? And finding an identity. We're trying to create change by saying that we're here and we're present, but at the same time, we are labeled in these categories that we might not necessarily understand, which really adds to the reason as to why we need ethnic studies, right? So we can find some sense of security as to who we are, and we learn the history about us and those who came before us, who created that identity. There's just that term for ourselves. So the census is a huge issue right now in terms of redistricting, especially for Filipino Americans in the Bay Area, because we found that we have a scholar, RJ, in the Blossom Center, who's looking at census in order to discuss the health concerns of the larger Filipino American and Filipino immigrant communities in California. But we've noticed that, a lot of Filipinos, they don't participate in the census, right? Because either they don't have access to it, or because they worry about, if they participate in it, how they will be seen, because some of them are undocumented, some of them are full-fledged citizens, or some of them are on visas. So there's all these insecurities that come with the census data. But again, it's also very important to participate in them so that we can say and claim a space that we're here and we can create change with what our district needs. So yeah, I totally understand, this idea of checking off a box and what are the implications of it.
Yeah, thank you for expanding on that.
We were talking about this, something along the lines with Angelica in our previous episode, and she focuses on Philippine X literacy. One thing I feel about like this generation or this time and space right now is that we have the opportunity to document our stories and rewrite our narratives. And I think that's why we've been getting so much feedback, like positive feedback with our show, because people want it now. And people want it now. They're looking for answers and they want to feel a sense of security in their own identity. And so I think overall, like just the whole like being seen more, it's like we all want it. And I feel like there's so many people that are actively in the forefront, making sure that we're seen. And I feel like you're one of those people, Stacey. And
Thanks.
I just really, I'm just in awe of the work that you're doing. And I definitely don't want this to be like the last conversation that we have on the show with you.
No, really though. I really, really love entering these spaces with other like-minded women. Like even my mentor, Dr. Rodriguez, like she supports what I do, right? And she helped create a space for me to do that at UC Davis when I was feeling at my lowest, because academics kept telling me like, what's so important about Filipino American women's history? Like there's nothing really there that hasn't been said already. It's these types of circles that affirm what it is and why it is that I do what I do. So again, thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I have like 2 more questions for you.
No, I keep telling you, thank you. My goodness.
Yeah. Yeah. So right now you are focusing on the lives of Filipino women in the USA during the Great Depression for your PhD program. And I'm curious why you chose that time period.
I am a nerd for old Hollywood cinema. My grandma, my Lola, was born in the 30s, and I was raised partially by her because my mom and dad, they're nurses. Now they're retired nurses, but they're working like crazy, ridiculous shifts all the time. So it was my grandma who actually taught me Filipino culture and Filipino language. So I felt an attachment to that time period because that's the generation she grew up with. And so I always thought that, well, I know now that there were Filipino Americans during this time period. How can I demonstrate their activism and their contributions to American society? So one of the main reasons is because it's an ode. My research is an ode to my grandma. So.
Oh, I love that.
I love that.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I feel like it's kind of obvious that you probably wouldn't be pursuing this if you weren't a Filipina. And so I'm just curious, in this whole experience so far, and I know your program has been crazy rigorous and you've just been studying nonstop and working nonstop. What have you learned about yourself in this journey so far as an activist and scholar?
Oh my goodness, so much that I wasn't expecting to. Number one was, I guess, finding these narratives about Filipino American women. Like, why is there this conflict between Filipino ideals and philosophies I was raised with, and then Catholic ones as well? And how do they not mesh with the education and training I got at the public school level and just being immersed in American society? Like, where is that conflict coming from? And why, when you add gender on top of that, why does it bother me so much? So those are some of the questions I had going in to doing this type of research. And then they were answered for me. They were answered for me in the form of these women's narratives. Like there's this one woman who was writing poetry in the Bay Area and Central Coast during the 1930s. She was writing this, Helen Guerrilleras. She's like 1.5 generation Filipino American. And she was writing about, why is it that my parents have such strict guidelines as what it means to be a Filipina? Why can't they see me as Filipino American? Why is it that the men in my family and the men in my Filipino American community, why are they so judgmental from how I dress to how I enjoy literature? Why do they always tell me I need to understand what it means to be a good Filipina woman? Like, what does that mean? So she had all these questions in like 1934. And I was reading it as I was going through these stacks of old Filipino American newspapers from the Depression era. And I thought, oh my God, her experiences, even though you can only find maybe like 5 poems of her and letters from her published in the Filipino American newspaper, the Philippines Mail. Like, why is this resonating so much with me? And so just doing, again, this type of research has been very therapeutic. Finding a face like mine in the Depression era from another Filipino American, it tells me so much as to how much more we have to keep going with this.
That's beautiful. And kind of what I had mentioned too throughout our conversation, I feel like I'm learning the most about myself through everyone else's stories. I feel more connected with all of you and with our history. And I was actually just thinking about this the other day. I'm planning on making a separate episode about this, but I'll just share it anyway. So last night I had a craving. This is like kind of off topic, but not really. I had a craving for McDonald's like at midnight. I was hungry. I was like, I got to go out and I got to eat something. I've had a stressful couple of days. But anyway, driving at night, and I go to the drive-through at McDonald's, and I was waiting at the second window when they give you your food. And the lady is Filipina. and she starts talking to me. And then the reason why she was talking to me is because I had my dog with me. Like usually when I'm driving at night, my dog is in the passenger seat. And so anyway, we were just kind of chatting, and she was just trying to get my dog's attention. And then eventually she was like, "Are you Filipina?" And I was like, "Yeah, I am actually." And I thought I just want to share this experience because back then, because I used to be a self-loathing Filipina, but back then when people would ask me that question, I'd always be quick to say, "Yeah, but I'm really Americanized." I'd say something like that. And so I actually said, "Yeah," like enthusiastically. I was like, "Yes, I am. You found one." And then when the food was ready, because it was taking a while, because I guess they were cooking the French fries still. But when she handed the food to me, normally when I would talk to other Filipinos, I would talk as American as possible. I would just say thank you very much, really appreciate it. But when she gave me the food, I said, "Thank you po," and then I just drove off. And let me tell you, I would have never, for years, I don't think I've ever said that to anyone in over a decade. I'm pretty sure it's been a very long time since, one, I was excited to run into another Filipino or Filipina, and then two, I actually took the initiative to say thank you po.
Oh my God.
And I have to say, it's all thanks to this project. The fact that I get to connect with other Filipinas and hear their stories and what they're going through, that somehow I just kind of, it was able to give me the foundation I needed to just feel so proud. And when people ask me that question now, it's and I wasn't even expecting that. I mean, come on, it was midnight, guys. And I was going through a drive-through. I was not expecting to run into a Filipina, but it to me, it just comes to show how far I have gone in my own journey as a Filipino American woman. And yeah, I really have to give credit to this project and everyone we've interacted with. And I think that's all we're trying to do as Filipino American women, is just find healing through history. And if we don't have that history right now, for me, it's finding that history through all of our stories.
Yeah, I know the self-loathing, I had those moments too growing up, but yeah, you're right. I didn't really understand what it meant to be Filipino American until I went to college and I took a Filipino history course. It was only offered once every 4 years before at UCI.
Wow.
In Orange County. And now they don't even offer it anymore because they don't have the funding for it. So again, I cannot stress enough how important it is that ethnic studies curriculum goes through, that we continue what we're doing with these circles of women, promoting and helping to redefine who we are and what we can do. And then also just places like the Below Sun Center where we can preserve these narratives. Again, yeah, self-loathing, that's the best way to avoid that or never have that happen to another brown girl, is to better understand where we come from and who we are and how our history has made us as we are. So yeah, totally understand what you're talking about.
I have one more question, but I want to check in with Nani if you had any comments or questions as well.
No, I think that was a really beautiful story. I'm happy to hear that from you.
Yes, yeah, it's a
So
new
that's how
story.
your narrative starts to change, right?
Yes, absolutely. Just that shift, I didn't even know that happened for me until that random moment at midnight going to McDonald's.
Yeah, when you just had that instinct that was never there before. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's crazy. I'm still shocked by it, like how enthusiastic and happy I was to run into another Filipina. I feel this is a moment for me, everyone. Like this is a life-changing moment. Like so much that even since I've moved here to Virginia Beach, like I have yet to get involved in like the local Filipino community. I hear there's a lot of them here because of the Navy. But I haven't actively like sought them out. And then ironically, so I want to give a shout out to Crystal with the Filipino American Foundation for Charities in Washington, D.C. The funny thing is that I have never been involved with their nonprofit. I've been to D.C. like a couple of times, and even so in like the recent weeks. But it's because of this podcast that Crystal was able to hear about us and had decided to feature the Filipino American Women Project and myself as a Pinay visionary for this month. And so I want to thank her so much for that. But in addition to that, having that experience I had like 24 hours ago at McDonald's, it now gives me the conviction and drive to really seek out what is here locally and contribute. I now like want to do it. Like it's not something that I feel like I'm avoiding. It's like it's part of my to-do list now to contribute to whatever Filipino community is out here in Virginia. So thank you to the lady at McDonald's. If I see you again, if I see you again close to midnight and I have a craving, I will thank you in person and let you know that I brought you up. I didn't even get her name, so I just said thank you, Paul, and that was it. So cool. Well, Stacey, final question for you. What you're doing, and I know I mentioned this a million times already throughout the show, what you're doing is admirable. And I know it takes a lot of hard work. What are your future goals or plans once you finish your PhD program?
Oh my God, that's like 3 years from now. It's like it's a 6 to 8 year program. Oh my God.
Oh man.
And, no, I know. And there's some graduate students who are on their 10th year. So I'm just like, oh my God, I gotta do this.
No, so much anxiety.
Oh my God, no, I get anxiety over emails. That's how bad and stressful these programs are. But but Jen, your guys' email, it was fine. But it didn't stress me out. It made me happy. But okay. My goals for after my program, if I get the chance to become a professor, I would love that, right? Because then I can speak to the future generations of Filipino American students, Asian American students, just everybody in general, and teach ethnic studies or women's history. That would be great. But I understand the reality of getting a tenure track job as a professor is very slim, very narrow, especially as a woman of color. But I know that my heart and passion really lies within community spaces. So I would love to actually dedicate my time and efforts in my future career to continue reaching out to these communities and representing them and their histories, and also teaching. Oh my goodness, I've taught K through 12 for like 10 years now, and I can't stress enough how important it is to reach out to kids, especially like underserved communities. I really want to be a part of that again after my PhD. Like the whole reason why I'm getting this PhD is not for the glamour of a professor job, but it's, that job is very difficult and strenuous in itself, but it's really so that I can create that bridge between academia, research, and the community. Like I want to be the ground woman, right, who helps to get their stories heard and what they need in their communities in order for things to change. I want to be part of that process, right? I don't want to be stuck in the ivory tower, I guess, in a way, but I want to use my career in the future to basically do outreach, research, and focusing on the youth. Like that's my main goal at the end of all of this.
That's very admirable. I don't have another adjective than admirable, but yes, that is very I feel like you, Stacey, and Nani are very like articulate. Like you guys have your adjectives and stuff down. So I'm just gonna say admirable because that's like
admirable is the first adjective that pops into my head in case that helps.
Thank you guys. No, really, because growing up in Daly City, it was just this community of different minorities. And if I had known about my history, if I had the opportunity to actually be taught Asian American history or just ethnic studies in general, I think it would have made such a huge difference in my community, Daly City, right? I just think, other families, other immigrants, other individuals in society, they could just benefit so much from having that instilled in their mindset and in their practice with interacting with people from an early age. And so I really think this is my way to give back to my community.
Yeah, I agree with you. I feel like had I known, if I had a way to understand our history, I think it would have made a big difference in my relationship with my mom and how she kind
Yeah.
of portrays the Maria Clara archetype very much, and just kind of my angst with like other being a self-loathing Filipino. And I just think of all the times in my 20s that I felt like I was kind of going through this uphill battle, or I was self-conflicted. And had I known all this stuff, I mean, really just these last couple of months of doing these interviews, just knowing that there are other women who struggle in the same way, and learning more about our history and understanding that a lot of what we're told was a lie because of colonialism. Like, had I known all of that, I don't think my life would have been as difficult. I think it would be, it probably, I'm not saying that I regret anything. I'm happy to come to a place where I can have a project like this to share my pain with people. But yeah, I only wonder, I look at like my white male counterparts, you know, like my husband and our roommate, and how the last thing they have to worry about is their identity. Like they know that they're white and men. Like that's not even a question. And they grew up with history, American history all around them. They can, like my husband, like if I ask him about when was I don't know, something in history, like if I bring up anything, he will most likely know the year it happened and why it happened. But for me, it's like like when he sometimes when he says like, why don't you, like, I can't believe you don't know like who the first president of America is, you know, it's like, well, I mean, I don't know what to say to you. Like I know that we were supposed to be taught in school, but I was dealing with a lot of inner conflict like throughout school, that it was just hard. I just felt so disconnected. And so yeah, like I think what you're doing is so needed in our community. And I hope together, you know, with what you're doing and what Nani and I are doing here with the project, we can instill like truth to our community at a young age, or even if you're older, to reclaim your narrative and rewrite your narrative and know that you are enough and you are worthy. And we have a lot of good work to do now moving forward, and a lot of man, what was I gonna say? I was gonna say like butt kicking or something. Ass kicking. We have a lot of ass kicking.
Yeah, you can say
that. Yeah. We're coming up, everyone. You watch out now. Yeah. That's all I have to say. Drop the mic now.
Drop the mic.
Yeah. Well, I feel like I learned a lot today, Stacey. I feel like you have like strengthened my resolve with what we're doing here. And it's just great to get that historical background to really solidify what we're doing. As we do this project, half the time I don't know like why I'm doing it, but the more I learn, the more like I look back at everything that we've done so far and realize like, yeah, this is some good work that we're doing, even if we don't know exactly like what it's going to do and who it's going to affect. And so I just want to thank you again for being a part of the change for our Filipinx community and Filipino American women. And with that said, for anyone that is interested in learning more about you and your book and the Bulosan Center, how can they do that? How can they get a hold of you?
Oh, okay. Well, the Bulosan Center, we have a Facebook page. So just look us up on Facebook and you can contact us through there if you want to get to know more. We also offer internships. So it doesn't matter if you are a student at UC Davis or at UNLV, University of Nevada, Las Vegas. It doesn't matter. You can have an internship with us and you can work from your space. And then also you can find my work, my publications with Pacific Atrocities Education. If you just Google that, you'll find their website. They're located in the heart of San Francisco's Chinatown. So you can find us there as well. And for me, you can Facebook message us on Bulosan Center and specifically ask like, oh, hey, Stacey, can I have some resources for blank and blank history? And I'll be sure to respond to you as like usually we respond within 72 hours, like maximum.
Very cool. And do you have any closing thoughts for our listeners?
I guess the main thing is just celebrate Filipino American History Month. It's so crazy how long it took for us just to be recognized, to have a month dedicated to us. So just like do a random Google search for the rest of the month, like once a day. No, really, to find some sort of Filipino American mirror that you can look at, even if it's like a short summary on Wikipedia, because the more you connect with history, even if it seems very broad and superficial, at least you learned one new thing about what helped create the identity that you're facing today. So I really recommend that type of like educational exercise once a day, because we all need a break once in a while. And sometimes that break can also be a healing break. And that means we can read something positive for the day. And for this month, Filipino American History Month, just look up a positive Filipino American fact.
That's good advice. And if you forget to do that on a daily basis, you can just set an alarm on your phone.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, Stacey, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you once again. 2 years later, I can't even believe.
That's so crazy. Oh my God.
Yeah. I feel like we'll have to like touch base again in we'll check in with you again in 2 years. Yeah, we'll see what more you have learned and what resources you have collected, but hopefully it'll be sooner. But of course, we want to respect your time. But yeah, awesome. Well, thank you so much. And also, we want to thank our listeners. If this resonated with you in any way, just check out our show notes. You know how super generous I am on there. I usually provide all the resources or most of the resources that we mentioned throughout the show, and how you can get a hold of Stacey and how you can get a hold of us. With that said, I want to thank you all. I want to thank you, Nani, again for co-hosting as always, and Stacey for joining us. We look forward to speaking with you in the next episode. Tune in next time.
Bye, guys.
Bye. Happy Filipino American History Month.